Hi everyone, this is part 2 of my revised talk that I gave recently at the Australian National Maritime Museum about Australian liners in the two world wars. And in this video we're going to be looking at two ships at opposite ends of the size scale. Our first ship is the smallest one that is involved in this talk, the diminutive Australian coastal liner Wollongbar. So what you can see up here is a digital reconstruction of this ship embarking on its maiden voyage. It's a pretty little thing. It weighs 2,240 tons, was 285 feet long, which translates to about 86.9 meters, and could move along at the zippy rate of 20 knots. Now, most Australians are aware of Byron Bay. Most international visitors are aware of Byron Bay. It happens to be just one of those wonderful coastal hamlets with a beautiful beach. But on that beautiful beach lies the shipwreck of Wollongbar's previous namesake, the first Wollongbar, or as the locals refer to them, the Wally. When the first Wally ran aground and was declared a total constructive loss, the owners, the North Coast Steamship Company, put in an order for an almost identical ship. It was an exercise in what we would now call a fear of loss of brand association. Such was the popularity of the first Wally that it was considered critical that the second ship look exactly the same, so that the collective memory of the ship would live on and people would associate their travel with the same ship. Brand identity. Old concept and still around today. Anyway, the only visible major difference between the two ships is that with the second Wally, and again, this photo is perfect for that, the main mast was positioned alongside of the aft deckhouse. If you're wondering, the first Wally, the main mast was positioned behind the main deckhouse, the main superstructure. This ship was completed and entered service in 1922, and for the next 2 decades operated along the north coast of New South Wales, one of the eastern states of Australia. With the outbreak of the Second World War, it was determined that it was too dangerous for passengers to use the sea route, and they were instructed to take the trains. However, this ship was retained on its commercial service so that it would continue to bring the supplies and the produce that was available from the north into city so it could then be distributed elsewhere. And on its final voyage, the Wollongbar was carrying 18,000, that is 18,000 cases of butter, bacon, and sugar. Departing Byron on the 29th of April 1943, the Wollongbar was struck by not one, but 2 torpedoes from the Japanese submarine I-180. The impact of 1 torpedo would have been enough to finish this ship off. The impact of 2 absolutely pulverized it, and the ship was quite literally blown to pieces. The survivors have distinct memories of seeing the 2 halves, the bow and the stern, standing perpendicular in the water before they disappeared below the surface. The destruction was so quick and so total that there were only 5 survivors out of a crew of 37. One survivor was exceptionally lucky. The force of the blast sent him flying overboard, and he ended up, of all places, landing on a life raft. When other survivors paddled over to check in on him, they found that his clothes weren't even wet. From the evidence that I was able to find, the ship was painted black, the hull was painted black, and the funnels were painted black to darken its outline, not that it helped its survival. And this is why, as you can see up here, the ship is depicted in that way. This image depicts an incident that was passed down by the local community. Apparently, there were two boys, the Hooper children, and they were playing on the beach, and they looked across and saw the Wollongbar steaming, and they witnessed the torpedo attack. They saw the ship explode and sink, and so they ran to tell their parents, but their parents thought that their kids just simply had vivid imaginations and did not believe them until the day afterwards, when accounts came out that the ship had indeed been sunk. The survivors of the Wollongbar were extraordinarily lucky that there was an RAAF Catalina flying boat flying over the ship when the attack happened. It was unarmed, so it was unable to attack the Japanese submarine. But with the radio, it was able to quickly put in a distress call on behalf of the ship, and rescue vessels were sent out to rescue the survivors. The Wollongar's loss meant that after the end of the Second World War, no other passenger ship would operate along the north coast, and within a decade, shipping along the north coast of New South Wales was essentially wound down. And to this day, nothing is traded by sea except the occasional yacht. From the very small to among the biggest. This is one of my personal favorite ships, and one that I love to talk about whenever I get the chance. We know that White Star Line operated on the North Atlantic, and that their most famous ship, in 1912, did not finish its maiden voyage. What is perhaps less well known and even forgotten is that White Star Line operated an Australian service as well, and they had run one for decades. It was mostly cargo ships bringing cattle back to the UK. However, in 1913, as they were doing that massive fleet regeneration with the new flagships, it was determined that the Australian run would also get a brand new flagship. We have the beautiful RMS Ceramic. This ship was a behemoth in its day, and especially on the Australian run. 18,713 tons, 655 feet in length, which translates to about 199 meters long, and a respectable speed of 16 knots. The Ceramic was the loftiest ship that could fit under the Sydney Harbour Bridge for a quarter of the century. It was White Star Line's flagship on the Australia run, and it was also the last ship that they would operate on their Australia run. When that company was wound up in the early 1930s, as we know, the North Atlantic Fleet was taken over by the Cunard Line, and its Australian ships, or in this case ship, was taken over by the Shaw, Seville and Albion Line, who gave the ship a much-needed refit, slightly expanded the superstructure, gave the internal fittings a bit of a zhuzh, a modernization, and then the ship kept running as normal. No name change, no livery change, no nothing. Same. And the Ceramic would have continued doing this for decades afterwards, had not the Second World War come into being. The ship's big size and cargo carrying capacity meant it was an excellent candidate for troopship activity, and this is what it was employed for during the war. Unfortunately, the Ceramic would have a tragic end. This photo is a digital reconstruction taken from a photo showing the Ceramic as it was in its troopship configuration in the Second World War. There are plenty of photos of it in the First World War. This one dates from 1942, just before its loss. As you can see, it is battered, it is weary. The war has not been kind to this ship thus far, and it was about to get even worse. On the 7th of December 1942, as the day wore on and the ocean got more and more rough and storm clouds gathered, the ship was carrying 264 crew members and 377 passengers. I say passengers, but it was a mixture of military, naval personnel, nurses, as well as civilians just trying to get back to the UK to conduct necessary business. That evening, over a period of 2 attacks, the Ceramic was struck by 5 torpedoes by U-515. In the first attack, we do know that at least 8 lifeboats left the ship, so we can at least deduce that the evacuation was orderly and that the bulk of the people on board survived that first attack. However, seeing that the ship was not sinking quickly enough, the U-boat commander of U-515 went in for another attack, and these final 2 torpedoes snapped the Ceramic in 2, and it quickly sank thereafter. And then herein lies the real tragedy. The weather conditions, already bad, became a full-on force 10 gale. And the U-boat captain had been under orders to rescue just the captain of the Ceramic for interrogation. With weather conditions being terribly rough and large waves battering the U-boat, the captain decided, I'm just going to take whichever survivor I can and we'll take them back for interrogation. And that's what he did. The crew found the nearest survivor, which happened to be a sapper, hauled him from the water into the U-boat. The U-boat submerged, and this particular individual was questioned and then transferred to a prisoner of war camp when the U-boat returned to Europe. The following day, a Portuguese destroyer went out to look for survivors. The Ceramic had been torpedoed off the Azores, and it had managed to get out an SOS before the final 2 torpedoes had destroyed it completely. Unfortunately, the destroyer found nothing, no survivors. There was some wreckage, but nobody to tell the tale. And for the rest of the Second World War, it had been assumed that the Ceramic had been lost with everyone on board. It was only at the conclusion of the war and with the release of prisoners of war that the truth came out, and that there had been, by pure chance and luck and fate, a single survivor from this once proud ship. And if you want to learn more about the sad fate of the Ceramic, then I could not recommend highly enough this book, Ceramic, The Untold Story by Claire Hardy. And if you want to see a review of this, head back to my other book reviews and you'll find a review of this there.